Union Carbide Bhopal gas disaster. One of the most destructive industrial catastrophes in human history started for a basically useless reason, a corporate desire to save a little money on maintenance. In the early 1980s, Union Carbide's pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, was losing profits. To stop the bleeding, management decided to cut costs by firing safety staff and turning off critical systems, including the refrigeration unit for a tank holding 42 tons of methyl isocyanate. But everything changed on the night of December 2nd, 1984. During a routine pipe cleaning, water accidentally entered the tank. This triggered a violent chemical reaction that turned the liquid into a heavy, deadly gas. The safety scrubbers that were supposed to neutralize the gas were turned off, and the flare tower meant to burn it away was under repair. The gas escaped, drifting into the sleeping city. Thousands died instantly. The thing is, the company had ignored warnings about the plant's condition for years. This disaster forced the creation of the Responsible Care program, changing the chemical industry forever. No one can say for sure how many lives would have been saved if the fridge was on, but we know the cost of turning it off was catastrophic. BP Deepwater Horizon explosion. The Deepwater Horizon disaster happened because of a rush to finish a job. In April 2010, the massive oil rig was 43 days behind schedule and millions over budget. BP managers made a series of risky choices to speed things up, like sending the mudloggers home early. But the worst decision came when they performed a negative pressure test to check the well's seal. The results were weird and indicated a leak. Instead of stopping, the managers explained the data away as a bladder effect to save time. They resumed work, removing the heavy mud that kept the oil down. That decision triggered a massive blowout. Methane gas shot up the pipe and ignited, killing 11 workers. The blowout preventer, a massive safety device meant to slice the pipe, completely failed. For 87 days, oil gushed into the ocean. The disaster cost BP over $65 billion and changed the oil industry forever. It proved that, in the high-stakes world of offshore drilling, ignoring a warning sign to save a few hours is the fastest way to lose everything. Boeing 737 MAX crashes. Boeing was once the gold standard for engineering safety, but that reputation was destroyed by a desperate need to compete. When Airbus launched a more fuel-efficient plane, Boeing had to respond quickly. Instead of building a new jet, they strapped massive new engines onto the 50-year-old 737 airframe. But the new engines were so big, they made the plane pitch up. To fix this without expensive pilot training, Boeing added a secret software called MCAs. The thing is, they designed it to rely on just a single sensor. When that sensor failed on 2 separate flights, the software became a killer. It repeatedly forced the planes into a dive while the pilots fought desperately to pull them up, unaware that the computer was fighting against them. The crashes killed 346 people. The tragedy grounded the global fleet and ended the era of self-certification in aviation. It showed that when a company hides technical details from the people flying the plane to protect its stock price, the result is total catastrophe. Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. In 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York was a death trap disguised as a workplace. The owners, Isaac Harris and Max Blank, were terrified that their workers were stealing scraps of fabric. To stop this, they routinely locked the exit doors to the stairwells. On March 25th, a fire started in a scrap bin on the 8th floor. The workers tried to escape, but they found the doors locked tight. Panic set in. The fire escape was flimsy and collapsed under the weight of the crowd, sending people falling to the street. Trapped by the flames and the locked doors, 146 workers died in less than 20 minutes. Many were forced to jump from the windows in front of a horrified crowd. The disaster didn't just kill workers, it ignited the labor movement. It led to strict fire safety codes and the requirement that exit doors must always be unlocked. It was a harsh, brutal lesson that safety regulations are often written in blood and that business owners could no longer treat employees as property. Ford Motor Company Pinto explosions. In the rush to build a car that weighed under 2,000 pounds, Ford engineers made a fatal compromise. The Ford Pinto's fuel tank was placed behind the rear axle, leaving it vulnerable to being punctured in a rear-end collision. Ford found out about this danger during crash tests, but decided not to fix it. They conducted a cost-benefit analysis. They calculated that adding a plastic baffle to protect the tank would cost $11 per car. They weighed this against the cost of paying off burn victims and decided it was cheaper to let people burn. When the car was released, accidents turned into fireballs. But when the internal memo was leaked, the public outrage was massive. It forced the largest recall in history and changed product liability laws forever. It established that a corporation could be held criminally liable for its products. Ford's calculation proved that while you can put a price on a car part, you cannot put a price tag on human life without destroying your own soul. RMS Titanic sinking. The Titanic was marketed as the ship that even God couldn't sink, but it was doomed by human arrogance. The White Star Line believed the ship's watertight compartments made it virtually unsinkable, so they carried only enough lifeboats for half the passengers. This was technically legal, but practically suicidal. On its maiden voyage, the captain received multiple warnings about ice fields but kept the ship moving at top speed to maintain the schedule. When the ship hit the iceberg, the unsinkable design failed. The water spilled over the tops of the compartments, pulling the ship down. As it sank, 1,500 people were left to freeze in the Atlantic because there weren't enough boats. The disaster completely rewrote maritime law, requiring lifeboats for every soul on board. It was a brutal reminder that nature does not care about marketing slogans, luxury accommodations, or the size of your ship. Samsung Galaxy Note 7 battery fires. In 2016, Samsung wanted to deliver a knockout blow to the iPhone. They designed the Galaxy Note 7 to be ultra-thin but demanded it have a massive battery life. This pushed the engineering to the absolute limit. The mistake happened inside the battery itself. To save space, the battery was slightly too large for its casing. This caused the internal separator to crimp, allowing the positive and negative electrodes to touch and short-circuit. When the phones were released, they started catching fire in people's pockets and even on airplanes. Samsung rushed to replace them, but the replacement batteries had the exact same manufacturing defect. The result was a total recall that cost the company $5 billion. This mistake changed the electronics industry by forcing the adoption of rigorous new battery safety standards. It showed that in the race for innovation, physics is the one competitor you cannot negotiate with. Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster. The worst nuclear disaster in history occurred because of a safety test that was run completely unsafely. In 1986, operators at Chernobyl disabled automatic shutdown systems to run a test on the cooling pumps. The reactor became unstable, a condition known as poisoning the core. When the operators finally realized the danger and tried to shut it down, a flaw in the control rod design caused a power surge instead of a stop. The reactor blew its lid, spewing radioactive material across Europe. The disaster killed dozens immediately and thousands more over time from radiation. It destroyed the myth of Soviet technological superiority and eventually helped topple the USSR. It forced the global nuclear industry to prioritize safety culture, proving that in nuclear power, there is no room for improvisation or secrecy. Rana Plaza collapse. The collapse of Rana Plaza in 2013 was a tragedy everyone saw coming, but no one stopped. The building in Bangladesh was built on a swamp with substandard materials and illegal upper floors. The day before the collapse, huge cracks appeared in the pillars. A structural engineer declared the building unsafe, and the shops on the ground floor closed. But the garment factory owners, under pressure to meet deadlines for Western buyers, ordered their workers back in. They threatened to withhold a month's pay if the workers didn't return. So thousands of people went into a building they knew was dangerous. Hours later, it collapsed, killing 1,134 people. The disaster exposed the brutal reality of fast fashion. It forced global brands to sign safety accords and take responsibility for their supply chains. It showed that the cheap price of a t-shirt was being subsidized by the lives of the people who made it. Space Shuttle Challenger explosion. The loss of the Space Shuttle Challenger was not a failure of technology, but a failure of management. The physical cause was a rubber O-ring that became brittle in freezing temperatures. Engineers at Morton Thiokol, who built the rockets, knew about this flaw and begged NASA to delay the launch. But NASA managers were under immense pressure to keep the schedule moving. One manager famously told the engineers to take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat. They launched. 73 seconds later, the O-ring failed, and the shuttle broke apart on live TV, killing all 7 astronauts. The disaster froze the U.S. space program and led to a complete overhaul of how NASA handled safety. It became the ultimate case study in business ethics, proving that when you silence the experts to please the bosses, you're paving the way for a funeral.